This," he pointed to the paper Jessica had brought, "is a forgery. And this," he indicated the document I'd found, "is Mr. Hayes' true will, properly notarized and irrefutable." Jessica's face utterly drained. I watched my niece, Jessica, always so confident, so arrogant, crumble right there in Mr. Hayes' office. "This is impossible! My dad wanted me to have the house!" She shrieked, her voice a raw tremor of rage and desperation. "Your signature has been forensically examined, Miss Jessica," Mr. Hayes continued, his tone professionally firm, unyielding. "And I must inform you that forging a will is a felony under the Penal Code." Jessica collapsed into the chair, utterly defeated. For the first time in years, I saw the little girl I'd once adored, now lost in her own tangled web of lies. Her eyes, so much like my brother Robert's, darted away from mine. "Why, Jessica?" I managed, my voice thick with a sorrow I hadn't expected. "I would have shared everything with you. I always have." She didn't answer, just snatched her expensive leather purse and hurried out, the sharp click-clack of her heels echoing down the silent hall like little bursts of fury. I sat there, clutching the envelope with Robert's familiar handwriting, feeling the heavy weight of a victory that brought no joy. Only a profound, aching sadness. You must be wondering how we got to this point. How an aunt and her niece, once so close, ended up in such a miserable, broken state. Let me take you back a bit and tell you how it all started. Robert, my dear brother, began to fade before my eyes 6 months earlier. The pancreatic cancer was relentless, swift. By the time the diagnosis came, it was already too late for any effective treatment. "Susan, you've always been my best friend," he told me one Sunday afternoon, sitting on the porch of the old family home, watching the hummingbirds he loved so fiercely. "I want you to have this house when I'm gone. You're the only one who truly loves it like I do." I tried to protest, to tell him not to talk like that he had plenty of living left to do. But Robert was always practical, unflinching. "It's all settled with Mr. Hayes. The house goes to you, the investments to Jessica. It's fair that way." That same week, Jessica showed up for one of her rare visits. I remember her sweeping in with huge sunglasses, her hair perfectly styled, as if she were off to a social event, not visiting her dying father. "Dad, we need to talk about the house," she said, without even asking how he was feeling. I was in the kitchen, making tea, but I could hear every word. "You know, I've always dreamed of having it. I have plans to completely renovate it." Renovate? That sent a sharp pang through my heart. This house held our family history, perfectly intact. Every scratch on the wall, every creaky floorboard, each told a story. "Jessica, we've already decided this." Robert's voice, though weary, held firm. "The house goes to your Aunt Susan." "To Aunt Susan?" Her voice shot up an octave, disbelieving. "Dad, she's already 67. What's she gonna do with a house this big? It makes no sense." "It makes perfect sense to me," he replied, a surprising firmness in his debilitated state. "This conversation is over." When I walked into the living room with the tea, the air was thick, suffocating. Jessica shot me a look that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't just disappointment or frustration. There was something cold, calculating in those eyes. Something that reminded me my niece, at 42, had become a very different woman from the sweet little girl I'd once cradled in my arms. In the following weeks, as Robert got worse, Jessica started showing up more often. At first, I was happy. Finally, she was giving her dad the attention he deserved. But I soon noticed her visits had a strange pattern. She always arrived when I was leaving to run errands or deal with Robert's treatment, and she always insisted on being alone with her father. "Auntie, why don't you go rest a bit? I'll take care of Dad now," she'd say with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. One of those afternoons, I came back early from the pharmacy and found her rummaging through Robert's desk while he was asleep, under the heavy effect of his pain medication. "What are you doing, Jessica?" I asked, startling her. "Nothing, just looking for a pen to leave a note for Dad," she replied quickly, slamming the drawer shut with unnecessary force. That night, I told Robert what I'd seen. He was silent for a long moment, then sighed deeply, as if bearing the weight of the world. "Susan, there's something I need to do," he finally said. "Tomorrow I want you to call Mr. Hayes to come over. I need to make sure everything's in order." The next day, the lawyer came and was alone with my brother for almost an hour. When he left, he gave me a firm handshake and a significant, knowing look. "Miss Susan, your brother's a very prudent man. Don't you worry." 3 days later, Robert took a significant turn for the worse. The doctor increased his morphine, and he spent most of his time sleeping. Jessica showed up with a friend I'd never seen before, a serious-looking woman she vaguely introduced as a colleague. "She just came to give Dad a hug, Auntie. They've known each other for years," Jessica explained, guiding the woman into Robert's room. Something told me it wasn't right, but who was I to prevent a visit to my brother? When they entered the room, I stood by the door, watching. The friend stayed by the bed for only a few minutes, then hurried out, barely saying goodbye to me. A week later, Robert was gone. It happened in the dead of night, quietly, just as he preferred to do things. I was by his side, holding his hand. Jessica arrived 2 hours later, already dressed in black, her eyes chillingly dry. The funeral was quick, just as Robert had requested. I noticed several of his friends hugged me extra tightly, as if they knew something I didn't. My sister Patricia, always so chatty, barely exchanged words with me, staying close to Jessica the whole time. It was the day after the burial that Jessica called me, her voice strangely, disturbingly chipper. "Auntie, we need to sort out this house situation soon. I have plans to move in this month." "Jessica, your father made it clear that—" "My dad changed his mind in his final days," she interrupted, her tone sharp. "He told me the house would be mine. I'm sure Mr. Hayes will confirm it at the will reading." I hung up the phone with a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Something was very wrong. Terribly wrong. The will reading was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, I received strange calls from relatives. My nephew, Kevin, my other deceased brother's son, called asking if it was true I had manipulated Robert during his illness. "What are you talking about, Kevin?" I asked, utterly shocked. "Jessica said you practically forced Uncle Robert to leave you the house, that you threatened not to take care of him if he didn't." I was speechless. How could Jessica invent something so cruel, so vile? On the day of the will reading, I arrived early at Mr. Hayes' office. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and I had a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Jessica arrived late, as always, wearing an elegant black suit and discreet, yet expensive jewelry. She sat on the other side of the table with a confident, almost triumphant smile that unsettled me to my core. Mr. Hayes began to read the formal document. When he got to the part about the distribution of assets, he adjusted his glasses and read clearly. To my sister Susan, I leave the family home, with all its contents and grounds, so that it may continue to be the home it has always been for us. To my daughter Jessica, I leave all my investments, bank accounts, and other financial assets. Jessica's face contorted into a mask of pure fury. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair with a violent clatter. "This is absurd! My dad promised me this house!" she screamed, her voice raw. "That old hag manipulated my father when he was sick. This house is rightfully mine." The shock of those words left me breathless, gasping. Mr. Hayes, ever calm, asked Jessica to sit down. "Miss Jessica, this document was signed by your father in full consciousness, with 2 witnesses, and is properly registered." "He changed his mind later. He made another will," she insisted, her eyes flashing with venomous rage. I left that room feeling like I'd been punched, gutted. Not by Jessica's outburst. I'd expected something like that. But by the way she looked at me, like I was an enemy, a stranger, and not the aunt who'd helped her take her first steps, who'd stayed with her when she was sick so her mom could work, who'd comforted her when her first boyfriend broke up with her. In the following days, the situation only worsened. Jessica launched a full-blown campaign against me. She called every relative, inventing elaborate stories about how I'd manipulated Robert on his deathbed. My nephew Kevin started looking at me with suspicion. My sister Patricia stopped answering my calls. The pain of losing Robert now mingled with the crushing anguish of being treated like an opportunist by my own family. I felt utterly terribly alone in that big house, full of memories and now, also, ghosts. 2 weeks later, I was at the grocery store, just buying the essentials, bread, milk, a little fruit, when Jessica appeared in the same aisle. Before I could turn away, she strode toward me, shaking a yellowed piece of paper like a weapon. "See? He did change his mind," she yelled, waving the paper in my face. "This house was always rightfully mine. You'll have to be out of there in a week." It was a supposed more recent will, handwritten. In it, Robert supposedly left everything to her. The document looked genuine, with a signature eerily similar to my brother's. People around us watched, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. I felt my face burn with shame and raw pain. "Jessica, please don't do this here," I pleaded in a low, desperate voice. "Why not? Afraid everyone will know the truth about you?" She shot back, loud enough for the whole produce section to hear. "That you manipulated my sick father to steal what's mine?" I abandoned my groceries, leaving the cart where it stood, and walked out of the supermarket in tears, feeling the crushing weight of my age and loneliness like never before. I drove home and sat in the old rocking chair that used to be Mom's favorite, staring blankly at the walls that had witnessed our childhood. How could Robert have changed his mind without telling me anything? He, who always shared everything with me, who made me promise I'd take care of the house, the way he always had. Something wasn't right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the height marks Dad had drawn on the wall when we were kids, at the black and white photographs of our parents. That's when a thought pricked me. The box of documents Robert kept in the false ceiling of the kitchen pantry. It was our childhood hiding spot, where we used to keep little treasures. Marbles, secret notes, rare baseball cards. As adults, Robert had turned that space into a safe spot for important papers. "No one ever thinks to look there," he used to say, chuckling. With difficulty, I dragged a chair to the kitchen pantry. My knees protested as I climbed up, groaning, and my hands trembled as I fumbled for the false panel. Finally, my fingers brushed against a small metal box. I pulled it out carefully and stepped down from the chair, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Robert and I had shared so many breakfasts, talking about everything and nothing. I opened the box slowly, with a sense of dread and hope. Among yellowed papers and old photographs, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it, in my brother's unmistakable, familiar handwriting. I tore it open carefully and pulled out 2 sheets of paper. The first was a handwritten letter. Dearest Susan, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I know Jessica will try to contest my decision. She's even forged my signature on documents before, when she needed money. This is my true wish. Our childhood home should go to you, who've always loved it as much as I have. Jessica will receive the investments, which are considerable, but the house is yours. Keep this document safe. With love, Robert. The second sheet was an official will, notarized, dated just 3 weeks before his death. After Jessica's strange friend had visited. My hands shook so much I almost dropped the paper. Tears streamed down my face. Tears of relief, of raw sadness at the betrayal, of overwhelming gratitude for my brother's final, profound thoughtfulness. Robert knew. He knew Jessica would try something like this, and he prepared. That colleague must have been a notary or a witness for a new, official will, made when he realized Jessica might be planning something insidious. The next day, document in hand, I went directly to Mr. Hayes' office. He examined the will, confirmed its authenticity, and immediately called Jessica, summoning her for an urgent meeting. And that's how we ended up in that scene in the lawyer's office, with Jessica leaving utterly defeated and me holding a piece of paper that proved not only my rightful claim to the house, but also the chilling extent of my own niece's betrayal. As I drove home that day, alone in the taxi, I looked out the window at the familiar streets of my hometown and wondered, what happened to that sweet girl I once knew? When did she turn into this woman capable of forging her own father's signature? And more importantly, would we ever be able to repair what was so profoundly broken between us? The house welcomed me in silence, as always. But now, in addition to the happy memories, there was also the heavy weight of a family conflict I never imagined I'd experience at 67. What would come next? How would I deal with the rest of the family who had believed Jessica's cruel lies? And above all, how could I move on knowing that the person I once loved like a daughter had tried to take everything from me? I sat on the porch, in the same spot where Robert used to watch his hummingbirds, and realized this story was far from over. The hummingbird feeder Robert had hung was still there, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. A small emerald green hummingbird approached, hovered for a few seconds, seeming to look right at me, as if recognizing me, and then darted to sip the nectar. He still comes every day, I murmured to the bird. Robert used to say it was always the same one, that he recognized people. The hummingbird buzzed as if responding, and for a moment I felt as if my brother was truly there with me. 3 days passed without news from Jessica. The phone rang a few times, but they were just telemarketing calls or wrong numbers. No family member reached out to me. The silence weighed more heavily than any accusation. On the morning of the 4th day, I was watering the begonias in the garden when a car pulled up in front of the house. I immediately recognized my nephew Kevin's black Audi. He got out of the car hesitantly, as if unsure whether to proceed. "Aunt Susan," he called, standing by the gate. I put the watering can down and walked towards him, feeling my heart race. Kevin was the son of my older brother, Jim, who had passed away 10 years ago. We had always been close, until Jessica's lies created this chasm between us. "Can I come in?" he asked, his face a mixture of shame and apprehension. "Of course, Kevin. This house will always be open to you." He followed me to the porch, where we sat in the old wicker chairs. Kevin seemed uncomfortable, his eyes scanning the garden, avoiding eye contact with me. "Aunt, I came to apologize," he finally said, his voice low, heavy with remorse. "Mr. Hayes called me yesterday. He told me about the real will, about Uncle Robert's letter, about everything." I remained silent, observing my nephew's face. At 38, Kevin had his father's same kind eyes, but at that moment they were clouded by guilt. "I should have trusted you," he continued, his gaze still averted. "I should have known you'd never do what Jessica said. It's just, she was so convincing, so hurt. I was an idiot." "You believed what seemed true at the time," I responded, trying not to let the deep hurt show in my voice. "Jessica has always been very persuasive." Kevin shook his head, running a hand through the graying hair at his temples, an early trait he'd inherited from his father. "No, Aunt. I've known you my whole life. I know how close you and Uncle Robert were. I know how you took care of him until the end. I should have questioned it. I should have talked to you before believing those awful things." I felt my eyes well up with tears, hot and sudden. The acknowledgement of the injustice, even belated, brought a quiet, unexpected relief. "Kevin, do you remember that summer of '92? I asked suddenly, changing the subject. He looked at me, confused, but then a small, tentative smile appeared on his lips. "When I broke my arm falling out of the tree in the backyard? Yes. You were, what, 10? 11, he corrected, his smile widening with the memory. "You climbed that apple tree even after everyone said the branches were weak because of the rain. And when you fell, it was Jessica who ran to get help." Kevin nodded slowly, understanding where I was going. "She was 16 at the time," I continued. "She canceled a date with her boyfriend to stay at the hospital with you. Remember how she distracted you by telling stories while we waited for the doctor?" "I remember," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She made up a whole story about how my cast would give me superpowers." We sat in silence for a moment, both lost in the memory of that Jessica we knew, caring, funny, supportive. "What happened to her, Aunt?" Kevin finally asked, the very question I'd been asking myself for years. I sighed deeply, feeling the immense weight of that question. "I don't know exactly, Kevin. I think it was many things. The difficult divorce, the pressure at work, maybe the way Robert always protected her too much." I remembered an afternoon about 5 years ago, when Jessica showed up here unexpectedly. It was pouring rain, and she arrived soaked, her face streaked with tears that mingled with the rain. "He left me, Aunt," she sobbed as soon as I opened the door. "Mark left me for his assistant, a 22-year-old girl." I hugged her tight, feeling her body tremble with raw sobs. I led her inside, gave her dry clothes, the same ones she used to wear when she spent weekends here as a teenager, and which I still kept in her old room. We sat in the kitchen, where I made her hot chocolate just like I used to when she was a child. Jessica held the mug with both hands, as if seeking not just the warmth of the drink, but some kind of comfort she had long lost. 12 years of marriage, Aunt. 12 years. And he just threw it all away, as if it meant nothing. I'm so sorry, dear, I said, holding her hand across the table. I know how much you loved Mark. She gave a bitter, humorless laugh. Loved? I built my entire life around him. I turned down promotions that would have required travel because he didn't want me to be away. I put off having kids because he wasn't ready yet. And for what? To be traded for the first girl in a short skirt who crossed his path. That night, Jessica stayed here. Robert came to dinner with us, and the three of us talked late into the night. My brother, always so protective of his only daughter, promised to help her financially through the divorce. Don't you worry about a thing, sweetheart. Dad's got this, he'd said, holding her tight. I saw something in her eyes at that moment. A cold glint, something calculating that unnerved me, but I brushed it off, attributing it to her pain and vulnerability. In the months that followed, Jessica managed to extract far more than was fair in the divorce settlement. The house they lived in, the newer car, a generous alimony. Mark, who I always thought was a decent guy, despite everything, he didn't fight anything. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of fear of her influential father. After that, Jessica changed. She became harder, more ambitious. She rarely visited us, and when she did, it was always with some specific purpose, usually to ask Robert for something. Aunt Susan, are you okay? Kevin's voice pulled me back to the present. Sorry, just remembering some things, I replied, adjusting in my chair. I guess the divorce was a turning point for Jessica. She became bitter, like she'd decided she needed to protect herself at any cost. That doesn't justify what she did, Kevin said with quiet firmness. No, it doesn't. But maybe it helps to understand. Kevin stayed for lunch. I made spaghetti with homemade marinara, our grandmother's recipe that everyone in the family always loved. As we ate, he told me he'd spoken with Aunt Patricia. She's regretting it too, Aunt Susan. I think she'll call you in the next few days. She's really embarrassed. And the others? Your cousins, your aunts and uncles? Mr. Hayes is reaching out to everyone, explaining the situation, showing them the real documents. People are just shocked by what Jessica tried to do. When Kevin left, I felt a little lighter. Maybe with time, family wounds could begin to heal. But there was still Jessica, and that whole story was far from over. The next morning, I was having my coffee on the porch when I saw an unfamiliar car pull up in front of the house. An elegant, middle-aged woman stepped out and walked toward the gate. It took me a few seconds to recognize her. Patricia, Jessica's former mother-in-law, Mark's mother. Susan, can we talk? She called from the gate. Surprised, I invited her in. We'd never been close, though. Always cordial at family events during Jessica and Mark's marriage. I'm sorry to show up like this, without warning, she said, sitting down in the living room. But I needed to speak with you in person. Has something happened? I asked, a tremor of concern in my voice. Patricia sighed deeply, adjusting her expensive purse on her lap. I heard what happened with your brother's will. The whole town's been talking. I felt my face flush, a hot wave of discomfort. The idea of our family tragedy being the topic of conversation in the local social circles made me deeply uncomfortable. I'm not here to gossip, she quickly added, noticing my discomfort. I'm here because I think you need to know some things about Jessica. Things that might help you understand what's happening. I offered her some coffee, which she accepted. As I poured the cups, Patricia began to speak. Susan, Mark and Jessica's divorce wasn't exactly what you might think. Mark didn't leave her for a younger assistant. He filed for divorce because he discovered that Jessica had been embezzling money from his company for years. The cup trembled in my hand, spilling a little coffee into the saucer. What? Jessica had access to the company accounts. She was the one who handled their personal finances. Mark trusted her completely. Until one day, the accountant found discrepancies. Large sums being transferred to an offshore account. I sat down slowly, the words hitting me like a physical blow, trying to process that shocking information. When confronted, Jessica denied everything at first. Then, when the evidence was irrefutable, she threatened Mark. She said she'd destroy him publicly, that she'd invent stories about abuse, infidelity, whatever it took to ruin his reputation. I can't believe this, I murmured, more to myself than to Patricia. Mark decided not to press legal charges. He loved her, despite everything, and didn't want to see her in prison. So he agreed to give her everything she asked for in the divorce, as long as she returned the embezzled money and signed a confidentiality agreement. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, suddenly feeling profoundly exhausted, as if the energy had drained right out of me, because when I heard what she tried to do to you, with your brother's inheritance, I realized she hasn't changed, and maybe you need to be prepared. Jessica isn't the type of person who accepts losing. After Patricia left, I sat in the living room for hours, looking at the family photographs on the wall. There was one in particular that always moved me. Jessica, at 5 years old, sitting on Robert's lap, both laughing as they ate ice cream in the garden of this very house. How did that adorable little girl turn into someone capable of forging documents, embezzling money, threatening people who loved her? Were there always signs that we just didn't want to see? I remembered an incident when Jessica was about 12. Robert had bought an expensive watch for his wife, Linda's, birthday. On the morning of her birthday, the watch had disappeared. The house was turned upside down. Everyone helped look. Linda was visibly disappointed, although she said it didn't matter. 3 days later, the watch, mysteriously, reappeared. Jessica found it under a sofa cushion, earning praise for her persistence in the search. But I was in the room when she found the watch, and I'm almost certain I saw her pull it from her pocket before announcing the discovery. I never mentioned it to anyone. After all, what reason would a child have to hide her own mother's gift? Now, looking back, I wonder if it wasn't just a childish prank, but the chilling first sign of a disturbing pattern. The phone rang, sharply interrupting my thoughts. It was Patricia, my sister. Susan. Her voice sounded hesitant, small. "Can we talk?" "Of course, Pat," I replied, using her childhood nickname. "I'm so ashamed," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Kevin told me everything. How could I have believed those lies about you?" "It's okay, Pat. Jessica can be very convincing." "No, it's not okay. We've been sisters for 65 years, Susan. I should have trusted you, not second-hand gossip." We talked for almost an hour. Patricia told me how Jessica had cried on her shoulder, spinning tales that I had manipulated Robert during his illness, that I prevented her from visiting her father in his last days, that I had hidden important documents. "She seemed so sincere, so hurt," Patricia explained. "And you know how I've always had a soft spot for her. Ever since Linda died, I've always tried to be a mother figure for Jessica. Linda, Robert's wife, had died in a car accident when Jessica was only 15. It was a terrible, harrowing period for all of us, but especially for Jessica and Robert. My brother, devastated by the loss of his wife, plunged himself into work, leaving Patricia and me to look after Jessica during that difficult time. Do you think Linda's death had something to do with what Jessica became? I asked. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I don't know, Susan. Maybe losing her mother at that age, in such a sudden way. But many people go through tragedies and don't become like this. After hanging up, I went to the room that used to be Jessica's when she'd stay here. I'd kept it practically untouched over the years. The 90s band posters still on the walls, the floral bedspread on the twin bed, the dog-eared books on the shelf. I sat on the bed, running my hand over the soft fabric of the quilt. How many nights had I sat right here, listening to Jessica tell me about her day at school, about her friends, her dreams? When was it that we lost that connection? I opened the nightstand drawer, where Jessica used to keep her diaries. They were empty now, of course. She'd taken her personal belongings ages ago. But at the very back of the drawer, hidden, I found something that made me pause. A small music box I'd given her for her 16th birthday. I turned the key and the soft, familiar melody of Fiorelise filled the quiet room. Inside the box, to my surprise, there was a small envelope. I opened it carefully and found an old, faded photograph. Jessica, Linda, and Robert at the beach, all smiling, embracing, radiating pure joy. On the back, in Jessica's childish handwriting, it read, "Best day ever. We'll always be this happy." Tears came without warning, blurring my vision. That photo captured a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness before tragedy changed everything. Did Jessica keep this photo here, in this room, as a kind of sanctuary for a happiness she never found again? The sharp sound of the doorbell pulled me from my thoughts. I quickly dried my tears and went downstairs. When I opened the door, my heart almost stopped. It was Jessica. She looked profoundly different from the last time I saw her at the lawyer's office. There was no makeup on her face. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was wearing jeans and a basic t-shirt. A look I hadn't seen on her in years. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice devoid of its usual arrogance, tinged with something I couldn't quite place. I hesitated for a moment, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, but then I stepped aside, allowing her entry. Jessica walked into the living room, stopping to look at the family photographs on the wall, the same ones I'd been contemplating just hours earlier. "You want something to drink?" I offered, more out of habit than hospitality. "No, thank you," she replied, turning slowly to face me. "I came here to talk about what happened." I sat in the armchair, gesturing to the couch for her. Jessica sat on the very edge, as if poised for instant flight. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice carefully level, neutral. She took a deep, shaky breath, looking down at her own hands, clasped tightly in her lap. "First, I want you to know that Mr. Hayes informed me he won't be pressing criminal charges against me for forging the will. He said that was your decision." I nodded slightly, a silent confirmation. After the meeting at the lawyer's office, Mr. Hayes had asked me if I wanted to prosecute Jessica for falsifying a document. The idea of seeing my niece facing a criminal case was too painful, too heartbreaking, so I had refused. "Thank you for that," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "I know I don't deserve your leniency." We sat in silence for a few agonizing moments. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the old oak tree, casting dancing shadows across the porch. Why, Jessica? I finally asked. The same question that had haunted me since the lawyer's office, but now imbued with a different, deeper weight. Why did you do it? She lifted her eyes to mine, and for the first time in years I saw genuine, raw vulnerability in them. I needed this house, Aunt Susan, she said, her voice almost a whisper, raw with emotion. Not for the reasons you imagine, not to sell it or renovate it. Then why? Because it's the only place I ever truly felt happy, she replied, the words coming with painful difficulty, each one a struggle. After Mom died, nothing was the same. Dad withdrew. He buried himself in work. I felt abandoned. But here, in this house, when we came on weekends, on holidays, it was like we could pretend we were still a family. Her words caught me completely by surprise. I'd always imagined Jessica wanted the house for its material value, perhaps to sell it or transform it into something cold and modern. When Dad got sick, I realized I'd lose not just him, but this place too. The last tangible link to a time when I felt safe, truly loved. You could have told me that, Jessica. We could have found a solution together. She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Tell you what, that I'm a 42-year-old adult desperately clinging to childhood memories, that I failed at everything. My marriage, my career, my life. That I'm drowning in debt because I tried to maintain a lifestyle I can't afford anymore. Debt? I repeated, stunned. But what about the divorce settlement and the inheritance your father left you? Jessica looked away, her shame evident, a visible weight on her shoulders. The divorce money ran out years ago. As for the inheritance, the investments Dad left me are all tied up. I took out some loans against them, even before he passed. I gambled on some investments that went belly up. The revelation left me utterly stunned. The situation was even worse than I'd imagined. Is that why you forged the will? To get the house and sell it? To pay your debts? No, she exclaimed, sounding genuinely deeply offended. I would never sell this house. I wanted to live here, to start over. Away from the debts, the lies, everything that went wrong in my life. I looked at my niece. I really looked at her. And I saw past the carefully constructed facade of confidence and arrogance. I saw a broken, lost woman, desperate for a connection to something real and meaningful. Jessica, I said softly, my voice filled with a tenderness I hadn't known I still possessed. What you did was very serious. Forging your father's signature, lying to the whole family about me, trying to take what Robert wanted me to have. I know, she interrupted, tears finally streaming freely down her face, glistening. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that it wasn't just about greed. It was out of desperation. Out of fear of losing the only place where I still feel connected to who I was, before everything went wrong. I got up and went to the window, looking out at the garden where Robert and I used to play as children, where later Jessica played too. This place held so many memories for all of us. What are you going to do now? I asked, still with my back to her. I don't know, she replied, her voice choked, thin. Probably sell my apartment to pay off some of the debts. Maybe move to another city. Start from scratch. I turned to face her. What if there's another option? Jessica looked at me, confused, a flicker of something in her eyes. What option? This house is too big for me alone, I said slowly, the words forming as I spoke them, a new possibility taking root. It's always been a family home, full of people, full of life. What are you suggesting, Aunt Susan? I'm suggesting that maybe you could live here, not as the owner, but as family. Her eyes widened in pure disbelieving shock. After everything I did, you'd let me live here? With a few conditions, I replied firmly, leaving no room for doubt. First, you need to be completely honest with me about your financial situation. Second, we're going to get professional help, therapy, to deal with all of this. And third, you need to make amends with the rest of the family. Own up to what you did. Jessica seemed utterly incapable of believing what she was hearing. Why? Why would you do that for me? I sat back down, this time moving closer, sitting beside her on the sofa. Because we're family, Jessica. Because your mother was like a sister to me, and I promised her I'd always look out for you. Because your father, despite all the mistakes he made as a dad, loved you profoundly. And because... I hesitated for a moment, then gently took her hands in mine. And because I love you too, despite everything. You're the daughter I never had, Jessica. And family doesn't give up on each other, not even through the toughest times. The tears now ran freely down her face, a steady stream. And for the first time in many years, I saw the girl I knew. Vulnerable, sincere, capable of feeling deeply, truly. I don't deserve this, she sobbed, her voice breaking. Maybe not, I agreed softly. But it's not about what we deserve. It's about what we need to heal, to move forward. That night, Jessica stayed for dinner. We cooked together, something we hadn't done since she was a teenager. The conversation was hesitant at first, full of uncomfortable silences and superficial topics. But gradually, slowly like ice melting under the sun, the tension began to ease, to dissipate. After dinner, I showed her the photograph I'd found in the music box. Jessica held it with exquisite care, as if it were a fragile, priceless treasure. I'd forgotten about this picture, she murmured, her voice soft with memory. It was the summer before the accident. We spent a whole week at the beach. Mom was so happy. She was always happy when she was with you and your dad, I said gently. Linda loved you more than anything in the world. Sometimes I wonder what she'd think of me now, Jessica said, tracing her finger over her mother's image, of what I've become. She'd be sad about some of your choices, I replied honestly, not sugarcoating it. But she would never stop loving you, or believing in your capacity to change, to be better. Jessica returned the photo to the music box. Do you really think I can change, after doing things wrong for so long? Never is too late to choose a different path, Jessica. Never. She stayed the night in her old room. Before turning in, she paused at the living room doorway where I was reading. Aunt Susan. Yes. Thank you for not giving up on me when I'd already given up on myself. 3 months have passed since that night. They haven't been easy months. Jessica moved into the house 2 weeks later, bringing only the essentials. She sold her luxury apartment to pay off some of her debts and is working on a rigorous payment plan for the rest. We started therapy, her individually and some sessions together. Slowly, painstakingly, we're unearthing years of hurt, misunderstandings, and dysfunctional patterns. It's painful, raw, but utterly necessary. The family reacted with suspicion at first. Kevin was the first to give her a chance, coming for dinner with us a few times. Patricia took longer, but eventually she came around too. Other family members followed, some more reluctant than others, but the tide was turning. Jessica found a job as a French teacher at a local school, finally using a skill she'd neglected for years while pursuing a corporate career that never truly satisfied her. As for me, I've rediscovered the quiet joy of having daily company, of teaching old recipes, of sharing stories about the past, not just the happy ones, but also the difficult ones, the ones that shaped us. Today, as I was watering the begonias in the garden, now with Jessica's help, she'd discovered an unexpected knack for gardening. I realized that this house has gone back to being what Robert always wanted. A family home, full of life and possibilities. The truth about Jessica, about our family, about our wounds, and our profound capacity to heal, continues to reveal itself every single day. It's not a perfect or finished story. It's complex, sometimes painful, but authentically, beautifully real. Last night, I found Jessica on the porch, in Robert's favorite spot, watching the hummingbirds. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just observing her. She seemed at peace, not completely healed, not yet, but clearly on her way. "He still comes every day," she said without turning, somehow knowing I was there. "The same hummingbird. I guess Dad was right. They really do recognize people." I sat down beside her, and we sat in comfortable silence, watching the small emerald green bird hover before the feeder. "You know what I've learned these past few months, Aunt Susan?" Jessica said finally, her voice soft with newfound wisdom. "That the real inheritance isn't the houses, the money, or the objects. It's the memories, the values, the lessons we carry." I smiled, feeling a wave of deep pride and burgeoning hope. "Your father would be so happy to hear that." "I think he knew, in the end," she responded, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning its slow descent. "I think he left the house to you, not just because you loved it, but because he knew you'd understand its true value. And that eventually you'd help me understand it too." I took her hand and squeezed it gently. Maybe Robert really did know. Maybe in his quiet wisdom, he foresaw that this would be the winding, difficult path to our healing. Not just for me or Jessica, but for the whole fractured family. The truth that came out wasn't just about a forged will or a disputed inheritance. It was about losses and new beginnings, about wounds and scars, about the profound human capacity to inflict pain, and also, miraculously, to heal. And as the sun set over our childhood home, casting long, peaceful shadows, I realized some truths can only be understood when we're finally ready to face them. Not with anger or resentment, but with compassion and the unwavering willingness to rebuild what was broken. This is the true legacy Robert left us. Not a house of bricks and mortar, but a sacred space where love, even wounded, can always find its way back home.